Hello there. I hope everyone is doing well. I'm excited about this next part of the video because there are several things that I want to talk about and discuss that are fascinating to dealing with World War I. At this point, the German army has busted through Belgium. They have attacked and then been stopped at the Battle of the Marne by the French and British forces that are there. And that comes and basically shatters up to pieces the Schlieffen Plan that the Germans have been working on for so long. In this video, we're going to discuss some of the feelings of the troops during this time, several of the little battles that take place in this time period at the end of the second half of 1914. Next video, we will discuss more of what's happening on the Eastern Front. This here is called the Western Front. All right, let's go ahead and get started. If you can imagine with me the outline of what is taking place on the battlefields in France at this point. The German army has invaded through Belgium, and they did not come right against the English Channel or the Atlantic Ocean. They came down a little bit south of there, tried to avoid the French artillery and the French defenses that were there, and were stopped at the Battle of Marne. Well, when that happened, there was still a lot of distance between the ocean and the battle lines that had been set up. And what this had caused was a big gap there that whichever side, the Allies or the Axis, the French and the British or the Germans, whoever was able to get to the sea first, get to the ocean, would be able to what is called turn their front. Now, that is a military term, meaning that if they turn their flank or turn their front, that they go and they get around the side of them and they're able to attack and push down and crush the line of the enemy there. Both the Allied powers and the Axis powers, or the Central powers, excuse me, they're not the Axis powers, it's more, wanted to do this. And so they go through and begin a battle, or at least actually it's a sequence of battles that would become known as the Race to the Sea. If you look it up, you can see maps of where multiple different battles take place. And the first battle actually starts on September 25th. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these individual battles, more of going through just talking about what takes place here. For 4 days, there is the Battle of Picardy that takes place there, and this is where the two armies, militaries, kind of collide into each other, trying to mess up each other's flank. It doesn't work, so they move again a little further north. Now, another battle happening at the same time happens at the Battle of Albert that lasts for about 4 days. Then we go and have another battle where they go up, and it's the Battle of the Arras, and they're trying to push through these different places here. The next section of battles that takes place here are very long battles. All of them start in the middle of October and don't end until the beginning of November. And so these battles last for a long, long time. And it is really just a single battle that is constantly bombarding these men. The Battle of, and I'll probably pronounce these wrong, but the Battle of La Bassée, it goes from the October 10th to November 2nd. Then another one, the Battle of Messines, goes from October 12th to November 2nd. And then another one, the Battle of Armentines, and again, I'm probably pronouncing these wrong, and I apologize for that, October 13th to November 2nd. So 5 or 6 battles are taking place here as the different armies are trying to get to the sea so they can outflank the other one. And neither one of them actually were able to do this. Eventually, it takes place where we will have a battle that sets up where the Belgians look at it, and for years they have been doing something called reclaiming the ocean or reclaiming the land from the ocean. They would build what were called dikes, which are basically large earthen dams, and they would go a little bit out, they would build these dams, and they build it up there, and then they drain the water that was there, and they'd have all of this reclaimed land that they could use. Well, it got to the point where the Germans were so close to winning this race to the sea that the Allied powers, and Belgium included, realized they needed to destroy these dikes. And when they did, it creates almost a mile-wide river automatically that goes through there is able to destroy what's taking place. So after the battle takes place, or the many battles, the race to the sea takes place, the lines for the Western Front really become solid and won't change for many, many years. And what develops after this is what becomes known as trench warfare. Trench warfare is a natural result of the situation that's happened. You have these battlefields, you have these situations that are going, these massive armies that are able to sit there, the countries supporting them that are able to take punch after punch, as we discussed in last video. And what is happening here now is that they're there. And they set on these trenches, and the trenches kind of started out as basically where soldiers would go and they'd lay down on the ground and they'd have their shovel or their bayonet or even their hands, and they would dig a little hole in the ground and to just help protect them from the shells or the bullets that are flying around. Well, eventually, these little holes the holes that they would dig there, they would dig them a little bit deeper. They become known as foxholes. Well, then the foxholes they were all connected. And so you'd have this one line of trenches on one side and another line of trenches on the other. Well, as this would take place, you would have behind the very front line another just 300-400 yards, another trench that would be dug. And there would be tunnels or trenches that would combine these, and then behind that one would be another one. Behind that one would be another one. And in between the German and the Allies' trenches was an area called No Man's Land. Nobody owned it. Nobody did anything in there. It was both sides fired at whatever was going on there. And that's how this war, especially on the Western Front, just bogged down into this trench warfare. That's one of the reasons the last battle lasted for so long, almost half a month. And there's just carnage and mayhem and death and destruction going around there. Now, one of the worst, if you were able to put yourself in one of the worst battles of ancient warfare to ever have taken place, you would have been in that battle for about a day with the carnage, the mayhem, the destruction all around you. These men, they are in a new situation. They are in these battlefields. They are at these battles for days, weeks, sometimes months, where the cannons are being fired, the shells are exploding around them, their friends are dying around them. They're in these mud-bottom trenches and trying to survive what's going on here. And everything that they would need to do in the normal life situation, they have to do in these trenches. And if they pop up above the trenches, there's a chance that they get killed. And for months this would happen. And what started to develop was something that became known as shell shock. Today we know it as PTSD. And these men would get this shell shock, but the problem was that the idea and the temperament of the military commanders that were there had not come to fully understand what this was. They saw this as a exhibit that these men were cowards, that they couldn't handle it, that they were choosing to behave this way. And men on both sides were executed for cowardness because of the effect that happened on them, the mental strain, and that they just weren't able to keep up with it. Well, they go through here, and the race to the sea ends, and the trenches begin to develop, and we'll talk more about those later. And finally, what happens at the end of the war there, or sorry, not the end of the war, but near the end of 1914, there was another battle that was pushed through there, the Battle of Ypres, where the Germans are able to stop the British from getting where they need to go, and the Germans, even though they don't win the battle or the race to the sea, they kept the British and the French from winning it, so it's a good stalemate for both of them. In the end, there are over almost 2 million casualties combined from both sides. 2 million casualties. To help you understand that again, a casualty, as I've mentioned before, is not a death. A casualty is where the soldier is no longer battle ready. They're no longer capable of fighting well in the battle. The Germans have 800,000 casualties. This is also not just with the, including here, they have over 125 or 116,000 killed in this race to the sea. The French have upwards of 450 casualties. The British lose 95,000 casualties that the British lose. They're almost the entire military of the army branch of the British is lost in this. I mentioned last video of how there were these wonderful, old, solid regiments of soldiers that had fought in wars that were experienced, and almost all of them become casualties at this point. 95,000 soldiers for the British are casualties, many of them deaths that they have there. And To help understand this Battle of Ypres that I talked about, the last one where they try to go and capture it, the British had lost roughly 89,000 troops since the beginning of the war. Over half of them, 54,000, were in this single battle. But this battle, the Battle of Ypres, lasted from September to October. The middle of September to the middle of October. A crazy situation. October goes through there, and then into November some as well. And they were able to go and halt each other there. Well, the war is continuing. The trench warfare is getting to the men. But one thing we need to remember, at this point, like I said, both sides have done atrocities that they shouldn't have done. But there is still no good guy or bad guy. The Germans are doing what they can to stop the Allies from getting supplies. The British are doing what they can to keep the Germans from getting supplies, as are the Russians, the French, and the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. All these people are trying to do what they can so that their enemy will lose the war. Well, what's happening and what some of the things that they are doing are, we would look at it and say they can't do that. But both sides are doing them. So there's really no good sides or good guys or bad guys. What we need to remember that on the ground, in those trenches, were real men. Boys, some of them, 17, 18, sometimes 15, 16 years old, that they were there in those trenches fighting. And they were human beings with human emotions, and human feelings, and human realizations. One of the things that would happen was on some of the quieter areas of the Western Front, usually when there were German and British soldiers. The French, they had been fighting this war on their home territory, so the French were pretty upset at the German, but when they were patrolling different areas, no man's land, things like that, if two groups of patrols would see each other, neither side wanted to die. Neither side wanted to kill the other one. And so they'd kind of see each other, and they would just let each other go their own way. You behave, you stay on your side, we'll behave, we'll stay on our side. Well, something amazing happened that first Christmas, 1914. Most of these boys, most of these men, this would be one of the first times they'd spend Christmas away. And the story goes that on the German side of the lines, there were sounds coming. The British could hear sounds, what almost sounded like music coming through from the German lines. Eventually, they would recognize the sound of hymns that they were singing. Ones that were, now they were singing in German, so the British didn't know the German words for it, but they were going through there, and it was taking place. And so they hear the sounds that go through there. And the British, in their trenches, start singing along as well. And the two different sides are singing, and now there had been a little bit of fraternization. A fraternization is where the sides would communicate or trade goods or different things there, because they're all on the same. They understand what the other guy's going through. Well, what's happening is the troops on both sides slowly start to come up from their trenches. Both sides are nervous. They don't know what's going to happen. When there was one side, they said they put a Christmas tree up on the German lines, is one of the stories that I've heard. But what is amazing is during this time, the men put aside their differences, they put aside their hatred and anxiety, their desire to kill, and they come together. Probably the number's about 100,000 troops total, German and British, come out of their trenches, and on the they call it the Christmas Truce of 1914. An unofficial truce is called, where nobody's shooting at each other, nobody's attacking. And the common soldiers that are in the trenches, they get up and they start, like I said, they start fraternizing. Now, some of the Christmas truce that was there was simply allowing them to bury their dead. Some of the dead had been laying in no man's lands for weeks, and so they were able to get them off and bury them without the fear of being shot. Also, different places, the men were talking. Now, if you could understand German or the Germans could understand English, it worked out really well, but sometimes they weren't. But that was okay. They exchanged little Christmas gifts, sometimes handmade scarf or gloves from home. They traded for chocolate or coffee with something there. Different soldiers were actually given haircuts to the other team. In one area, a soccer game was developed. There was a soccer ball that they found, or some kind of ball, and the British and the Germans, who 12 hours, 6 hours before this were trying to massacre each other, were now playing soccer together. And so they were going through there. Well, on Christmas Day, that's what they do. They were bored with war, they didn't want to do it, and so they started taking place. Well, once word gets back to the command headquarters, the leaders, the generals, the officers are furious. They order bombardments to start taking place. That they would go through and make sure that these troops would stop fraternizing and start killing each other again. Because the both officers, both set of officers, the Central Powers and the Allied Powers, realize if these soldiers get along, they're not going to want to kill each other. And then this war is for nothing. Now that sounds terrible, and it is. War is a terrible situation. That brings us to the end of 1914. We've got roughly 5 years to go, and we'll talk about some of the major key things that take place here. I hope you enjoyed today's video. No homework.